Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to introduce a true legend of sport who is considered by many as the greatest athlete of the 20th century, Wayne Gretzky. His extraordinary career redefined the world of hockey with 2,857 career points, 4 Stanley Cup Championships, and 61 NHL records still standing. Gretzky's skill, vision, and dedication earned him the nickname, from the age of 10, the Great One. Off the ice, his humility, graciousness, and approachable demeanour have made him a beloved figure, inspiring not only through his achievements but also through his character. As a global ambassador for hockey, he continues to uplift generations of athletes and fans. Please join me in welcoming Wayne Gretzky. Fantastic. It's really very special to have Wayne here today. And for background, at Kelly+Partners, our tagline is "Be better off," which means we're sitting there as accountants and we shouldn't just help you with your taxes and accounting, but we should make sure that you're better off, healthier, wealthier, and wiser. I heard an interview of Wayne and I thought this description was so apt when they said the best thing about Wayne is that he makes other people better. And so that's our aspiration, and that's why I reached out and tried to get Wayne here today. So we're very honoured to have you here, Wayne. I'd love to start with, where did you grow up and what was the influence of your mum and dad?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all very much. It's nice I don't have to fly somewhere. I'm 20 minutes down the road, so this worked out really nice. You know what? I was really lucky. I had a great family, wonderful support. My mom and dad were always there. My grandparents, I was very close to all 4 of my grandparents. And, you know, we were lucky. We weren't rich in money, but we were rich with support and love. And, you know, people always said to me, did your dad push you? Did your mom push you? And quite opposite. There was no pushing. I started skating at 2 years old, and I just had a passion for it and a love for it. And they were tremendously supportive to make sure that I got an opportunity to participate. And my dad was a big believer that whether you're good or bad in sports or overly talented, that sports was a tremendous way for kids to consume time. It's the kids who have a lot of free time that seem to get into those trouble areas. And so we're always busy through lacrosse or track and field, baseball, ice hockey. And my dad always believed that the one thing about sports is you learn about life, and that is you learn how to work hard, you learn how to make a commitment, you learn how to become dedicated, and in a team sport you learn how to become unselfish and to rely and use your teammates as much as possible. And you also learn what it's like to be successful, and then there's times where you get knocked down and you lose and you pick your lip off the ground and get better the next day. So I was very fortunate. I had a really good group around me.
And there's a story I heard about you very young, maybe 10 or 14 years of age, and your father said to you after I think you lost the game, play well for the people that are here, do your best. Where did that mindset come from and how did it influence you?
Well, when I was 5 years old, I made this 10-year-old travel team. And in those days, there was one team started at 10. And I was about this big, and I made the team. And the coach came over to get my birth certificate and to sign to register to play on the team. And when my dad handed him my birth certificate, he started laughing. He said, I can't have a 5-year-old on the team. And so I didn't play that year. We all decided, or I guess the coach and my dad decided, okay, let's wait a year. So I made the team the next year, and I played on it for 5 years. In the first year, I got 1 goal. And by the 5th year, playing against 10-year-olds my own age, I scored 400 goals. And so every arena we would go to, they would fill the arenas. There'd be jam-packed. And so the season ended, and for people who don't realize or know this, but my real passion was baseball, and I loved to play. And when hockey season was over, I always threw my bag downstairs, and I couldn't wait to get my baseball glove and start playing baseball. And the season had ended, and the coach came over to our house midweek and said, this team, which was about 45 minutes away, they want to play an exhibition game on Saturday, but we're not going to play if Wayne doesn't want to play. And my dad said, what do you want to do? I said, okay, I'll play. And so we get to this arena, and it was jam-packed. There must have been 1,500 people in there, this old arena I'll never forget. And we got beat 8-1, and I could probably sense that my dad, nobody really knew who my dad was, and people were probably saying he's not that good, he's overrated, and probably by the 100th person, my dad probably got his dander up. So when we got in the car, he said, how'd it go today? And I said, oh, who cares? It's the end of the year, it doesn't matter. And he said, stop the car, and I'll never forget, he said, I don't know why or what reason, but for whatever reason, people want to pay and come and watch you play. And you have to play your best every single night. And so it was an invaluable lesson for me, because then when I got to professional in the early 80s, there wasn't teams in Miami or Tampa Bay or Dallas or Vegas. And we would play these exhibition games in places like San Antonio and Dallas and Miami, and we would sell these games out. And so what I learned at the age of 10, that I had to play the best I could play those nights, because even though it's exhibition, those people may never get a chance to see me play live again. And so my dad was always a big believer that you learn so much at a young age and you carry it on into your adult life.
So you've mentioned there that you scored 400 goals in a season.
Mm-hmm.
I thought one of the most interesting things as I was researching your story was that you also had a huge amount of assists.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain to us what an assist is? I'm an Australian, so
Yeah.
not a big hockey player. But the idea was that even at a young age, there were people commenting that you would get the ball a lot and score a lot. But I think your career statistics point out that you had the same or more assists as goals you scored.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, at the end of the day, and I always said this, that you're a team, right? And not everyone is equal. Each guy is there for a reason or a purpose. And especially in a team sport, you need to rely on your teammates. And one of the most important things to me as an athlete or as a team player was you had to earn the respect of your teammates. And if you don't earn the respect of your teammates, then you got a lot of problems, because it's a hard game to play. I was fortunate enough, I played with a lot of Hall of Famers, but more importantly, I played with a lot of really good people. And to this day, I'm still friends with mostly everybody I ever played with, and spend time with guys I played with. And there's a respect factor that you have for each other, because you've gone through blood and guts and war, and it's hard being a professional hockey player or being a professional athlete. And I was probably worse in the sense that I never really pushed my kids to be athletes. I supported them. And I was probably the worst father in the sense that I would never sit down and say, listen, if you want to be a professional athlete, you have to do this or you have to do that. I was there if they asked questions, and I was there to support them. But, I knew the other side of the life that, listen, I was very grateful, but it's hard. It's hard to become an elite professional athlete. Only select a few get to do that. And it's even harder to follow the footsteps of a father that is in the Hall of Fame. And so I got a great deal of respect for the younger athletes who play professional sports whose fathers were successful, because it's hard enough. But I also believe that your teammates are so important to you. And the last thing I always wanted never to happen was that they didn't think I was a good teammate. And that was very important to me.
So in the context of business and the things that you've done since, because you've had so many interesting adventures. How did you translate this, sense of you've been called the Great One, but everything that I read said you were a great teammate. How did you build teams in your life after sport?
I think that most important thing for me always was, starting in 79, 80, when people started to come around and, you get asked to endorse products, and you get, especially when you're younger, everybody wants to open a restaurant, which, if you don't know what you're doing, can be a lot of headaches, as everyone knows. But I always felt that my most important quality was that I wanted to be partners for a long time. So I was with TD Bank for 18 years. I worked with McDonald's for close to 10 years. I have a winery now that I've had for 12 or 14 years, I guess, in Niagara. I had a restaurant in Toronto for close to 30 years. So I always felt like I wanted to surround myself with good people, the right people, team players. I didn't tell them how to do business, and they didn't tell me how to play hockey, and it seems to work out really well. But I've been fortunate. People are everything, right? And if you partner and get around the right people, not only does it become fun, it becomes successful, and there's great stories to tell forever and ever.
So it's very interesting, this idea of long-term partnership. Where did you pick that up?
Well, it was pretty easy for me in the sense that, my folks, they had the same friends their whole life. They were best friends with the people that I knew from the time I was 2 years old to the time that my parents passed. And then I was lucky enough to meet my idol, who was Gordie Howe. And sometimes when you meet your idol, I met him when I was 10 years old. And I'll never forget, my dad said to me after we met, and we did this charity dinner that night in my hometown. And my dad said to me, "How was it meeting Gordie Howe?" And I said, he was bigger, better, and nicer than I even thought of in my brain, And so he came to my hometown, and he spoke at the dinner. There was, I think, 700 or 800 people there. It was for Kinsman Club in my hometown. And so years later, 2 or 3 years before Gordie passed, I was going to his hometown to do a dinner. And there's, I think, 3,000 people were at this dinner. It was the Kinsman or Lions Club dinner, again, for charity. And so I surprised the people in Saskatoon. I thought, this would be really cool. I'll sneak Gordie Howe into Saskatoon and not tell anybody except for the MC, and we'll introduce Gordie. And so I snuck him in, got him right to the dinner, and when they introduced Gordie Howe, he got a standing ovation. And I always tell people, if Gordie didn't tell him to sit down, I think they'd still be clapping right now. He was so beloved. And so I learned from him. He was partners with a lot of good people. And in those days, they didn't make a lot of money playing professional sports. A lot of them had second jobs in the off season, and especially in the 40s and 50s. And so he was partners with a lot of people that he stayed partners with for 20, 25 years. And they were part of his life, and I learned from him. So I was lucky. My idol happened to be the greatest player who ever lived, and without question, one of the nicest athletes who ever lived.
So you've got this hero. It's so interesting. There is a saying, don't meet your hero, because often they can't live up to
it, yeah. Well, I liked mine so much. The next day I went to the barber shop and asked for a Gordie Howe haircut.
Yeah.
And the barber, I remember his name was Wally, the barber, looked at my dad and said, "I don't even know what that is." My dad said, "Just tell him you did it."
How old were you at that
10.
point?
10. I was 10. That was the year I scored 400 goals, and so The guy who was president of the Kinsman Club in my hometown, I was in school with his son. We were in the same grade together. And it was the father who was running it, came over to my dad and said, this would be really cool. And so, you know, when you're 10 years old, like every other 10-year-old, I couldn't even speak in front of my classmates. I was so nervous, right? And here I was, 10 years old, and they told the MC that I wasn't going to speak. I was just there. And so the MC forgot, and he introduced me. And I remember sitting there beside Gordie, and I couldn't even think. And I just had my teeth all knocked out that year. I lost all 6 of my front teeth. And I had these caps on, or could hardly even open my mouth or talk. And Gordie said, just tell them you're lost without your hockey skates and your hockey stick. So I'm thinking, okay, I'll say that. And I got up there and I just said, thank you. And I started crying. And I got a standing ovation. And I remember I sat down and Gordie said, great speech. So it was very unique. But I was like every other 10-year-old, right? When you got to stand up in front of your classmates and they tell you to do a book report or a speech. And then all of a sudden, now since that age, I've been speaking in front of people. And I don't know, it became part of my life.
The big move that you know, you're a young 10-year-old, you meet your hero,
right?
He gives you that lesson to, I guess, be admirable, and that has really carried with you. Mm-hmm. As you go through your career, who were the people in the sports organization, either in the teams that you played in, the coach or support staff, right, but who had most impact on you as a coach, and I guess what did you learn?
Well, listen, first of all, I'm a big believer in this for parents, that your kids at a young age should play every sport they can. And for me, my dad was a big believer in that. So I did track and field, I was box lacrosse, I played baseball. And I think all those sports helped mold me into the hockey player I became. Track and field, I ran long distance, so it built my endurance. Box lacrosse was the most physical sport I ever played, and you learn how to roll off body checks. Baseball is such a thinking man's sport that you always got to be mentally focused at all times. You got to know where you're going to throw the ball the next play, where you're going to go. And so all those sports that I played combined to make me the hockey player I became. And with that, at a young age, I had some really good coaches at a young age. I had a couple of bad ones, but all in all, they all meant well, and they're all volunteering, right? And in the age of 14, I moved away from home. And I look back at it now and I wonder, oh my gosh, my mom must have been sick to her stomach. I moved an hour away. I went, lived with these 2 people and their son, who was 2 years older than I was. I had never met them. My folks had never met them. And they became like second parents to me. To the day they both passed, I was very close to them. I lived with them at a vulnerable age of 14, 15, and 16. But they were such an influence in my life. And then I turned pro. And when I turned pro, I was lucky enough, the coach there, Glenn Sather, he had played with Bobby Orr in Boston. He played with John Belleville in Montreal. And he knew I was a young kid. I lived with him and his wife and 2 boys for 8 weeks when I first went to Edmonton. The players used to think that was kind of unique, that I was living with the coach, but I was 17 years old, and it turned out to be one of the wiser decisions I made, or he made for me. You're going to come live with me. And so I would say that, without question, he was the most influential as far as professional hockey goes, because he was great to me, and he was great to all the other guys in the team. And of course, we became successful and won championships. But he also was very hard on us. I think when we traded for players, one of the things that surprised players is how tough and demanding he was on the better players. But if you look at great coaches in team sports like Pat Riley, he was probably toughest on Magic and James Worthy and Kareem. And that's how you sort of send a message to all the other players. And those elite guys have to understand that that's part of coaching, and it's part of what makes the team good, is that, yeah, there's favoritism, there's no question, but there's also a fact that I can be hard on him. I can also be hard on you, and that goes a long way.
So those coaches that got you started, did you take that into your family? Did you take that into your businesses? And what were those lessons?
I think that the most important, the most influential people in your life are your folks, right, and your family around you. So it was always more. Once I left the arena, it was more. The focus was my dad and my mom. And my dad was always a big believer of preparation. He used to say to me all the time that failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And trust me, I did a lot of that in grade school. People used to always sit there and say, "Did you think you were going to be a professional hockey player?" And I said, "No, I never thought that. I was a small, tiny young boy. I wasn't very big. My first year pro, I was 5'11" and 144 pounds, and I was playing, living with men. So my dad was just always a big believer. Listen, you have to utilize your strength, and your strength is your preparation, and your strength is your brains, and that's what's going to make you successful." So, coaches were important, but my dad was the most influential on me, no question about it.
And what was it, your dad taught you to prepare, but where did that come from in your dad?
When I started skating, I was 2 years old, and my grandfolks came over, in the 20s, and my grandfather came with his brother to Chicago, and I still have relatives actually in Chicago. My dad's brother's kids and grandkids are there. But somebody got to because they both joined the American Army, or about to join the American Army for World War I. And somebody told my grandfather, if you go up to Winnipeg, I think it was $5 a month more or $3 a month more. So my grandfather went up to Winnipeg. It's where he met my grandmother. He fought in World War I, and then they settled in a little town in southern Ontario, farming district. And through his backyard, he had a river that went through. And so at the age of 2 years old, my mom's brother had an old pair of kids' skates, and those were my first skates that I wore. And I started skating, and I would skate for hours, even at the age of 2 and 3 years old. So then my dad would start taking me to these parks. And my dad kind of got famous because he built a rink in the backyard, and people would always say, "Did you build it for your son to become a professional athlete?" And he said, No. He was a kid. He's 5 years old, and he loved to do it. So he built it in the backyard so he could sit in the kitchen. He didn't have to be outside getting cold. But ironically, every early December, he'd say to my mom, he'd say, "Now listen, get over to the local store and go get me a sprinkler head," because he used to love to put the sprinkler out and go back and forth for 2 hours, and that's how he'd make ice about this thick. And my mom used to always look at him and say, "I'm not going over there in the snowstorm to ask for a sprinkler head. They're going to think I'm a kook." So my dad would go get it. And then, ironically, the funny thing was my dad was the worst gardener. Like, he had no patience for it. And people used to stop at our house and say, "Walter, I want to know, what are you putting on your grass in the backyard?" Because it was this high, and it'd be the thickest, greenest grass you ever saw. It was all because he froze the backyard and made it an ice rink. So everybody thought he was a green thumb. But, he was the most important influence. And he was the same. I have 3 brothers. He gave them all the same opportunity. Yeah. And he used to say to me, though, "I don't know why the good Lord chose you to have a passion so much for the game of hockey, but there's so many great opportunities, and it's all worthwhile if you put in the commitment and the time and the work ethic." And he was so right. I got a chance to travel the world, and I've been fortunate enough to meet presidents and prime ministers and Queen Elizabeth and Pope John Paul. So for a little young hockey player from a little town in Canada, it was all worthwhile.
So who is the person that you met that made you the most nervous, and who's the person you played golf with that made you the most nervous?
Well, I still get nervous playing with those guys. I played with President Ford in 1980, and I was really nervous, and he was known to hit people on the course, and I hit a ball, and all of a sudden we heard a thud, and I said, "What was that?" And the president said to me, that was one of my Secret Service guys in the tree. And I hit him. And, you know, playing with presidents, it's hard. Like, I have so much respect for what they do and playing with prime ministers. But the most nervous I was, my wife and I were lucky enough to have an audience with Pope John Paul. And when we met, I remember I looked at my wife and she just started crying. She had all these rosaries for him to bless, which he did. But the first question he asked me, because they told me, they said, you know, he was a sportsman. He grew up playing soccer in Poland. And the first question he asked me, believe it or not, was, do you speak Polish?
Yeah.
I'm like, where's my dad right now? But probably meeting him was the most nervous I probably was. Although in 1980, we played an NHL All-Star game in Washington, D.C., and they brought both teams to the White House for a luncheon with President Reagan. And I was 19 years old then. And we all walked in, and Bill Wirtz, the Wirtz family owned the Chicago Blackhawks, said, you know, young man, you're going to sit with Gordie and I and President Reagan. And I remember sitting there, and there was like 5 forks and 5 knives, and all these cups and everything. And I remember I said to Gordie, I said, Gordie, what fork do we use? He goes, I'll tell you what, I'll follow the president and you follow me. So we had this line going. We grabbed the fork, we grabbed the knife. And my dad said to me that day, he said, how was it? And I said, it was amazing. And he said, really? And anything surprising? I said, yeah. I heard him swear to Gordie Howe. I heard the president swear. I thought that was really intriguing because Gordie said something about the Russians, and President Reagan was like, yeah, I don't have to trust them either. I thought that was pretty cool.
It's incredible. So I must ask you, did your father speak Polish?
Yes. So
okay.
They spoke a slang. My grandfather was from Minsk, Russia at that time, and I think that was the time they were trying to kill, people don't know this, but my grandfather was 50% Jewish. Yep. And so a lot of people got out of there. And my grandmother, she was actually from Ukraine, the city that she lived in, but after World War II, and I hope I'm not messing this up, they sort of redivided Poland and Ukraine, and that city became part of Poland.
Okay.
So people always say, are you Polish or Ukrainian? I go, well, I'm a combination of Minsk, Russia. My grandmother was really from the Ukraine, which is now part of Poland. So my dad always thought, he goes, you know, your life is mapped out already. And so when I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time in my grandfolks' home. In the summertime, almost every weekend, I would stay with my grandmother, my grandfather, and they lived on a farm, and he had pigs and chickens, and my dad would always do his gardening. He had strawberries, potatoes, cherry trees, apple trees. But my dad loved to fish, and they had a river that went through the backyard, and after he'd do everything all day, he'd go fishing. But in the 50s, I had an aunt who was Down syndrome. And today, my dad always said to me, you can't say Down syndrome, it's mentally challenged. So in the 50s, they would take the kids and they put them in sort of asylums, and they would drug them a lot. And, you know, knowledge is everything, right? We know way more now today than we did in the 40s and 50s. Anyway, so my aunt my grandmother hid her on the farm, basically. Yeah. So she didn't go to school. She didn't want anybody taking her. So she never went to school. She couldn't read or write. As she got older, she was going blinder and blinder. But my dad used to always say, if you don't believe in the good Lord, you're crazy. Look at this. So all the grandchildren, we would talk to her in English. My grandfather spoke to her in Russian, and my grandmother spoke to her in Polish. It was the most incredible thing, and she couldn't count to 10. Yeah. And I remember one day I was like 9 years old, and I said to my grandmother, I don't believe you guys. And she goes, yeah, watch. So my grandmother told her something in Polish, and I think it was like, go put in a piece of toast for Wayne. And then my grandfather told her in Russian, put the tea kettle on. And I remember sitting there going, oh my God, they're not lying to me. This is true. And so my dad always said, if you become a professional athlete, there's more than just being an athlete. You need to give back to the community. And like I said, my dad always thought my life was mapped out for me. So the Canadian Blind School is in my hometown. So we used to do a charity event every year for the blind kids. And then when I went to Edmonton, I met a young boy who was Down syndrome. He was working at a bottle depot for $1 an hour. He used to get on the bus at 7 a.m. And Edmonton's cold in the wintertime. It can be 40 below, and that poor young man would be standing there. And so I took him in the locker room one day, and I said to Glenn Say there, I said, can we find this young man a job in the locker room? I said, I'll pay him the $100 a month. And he goes, no, we'll pay him. So he did folded towels, he did laundry, he vacuumed the locker room, he got the guys sodas, or in those days it was Diet Cokes, there was no Gatorade or anything, right? It was water or Diet Coke. And we built these homes because one of the hard things that people don't realize, when the parents pass on, it's sometimes tough to find homes for these kids. Yeah. And I remember my grandmother saying to my mom and dad, promise me that when I pass that she'll live with you guys and you won't put her in her home. So she lived with my folks for 12, 13 years. And so we built these homes for Down syndrome kids, mentally challenged kids. There's somebody that's full-time in the homes, but they have everything from TVs to computers. The only thing they can't do is turn on the oven. Other than that, they're self-sufficient. And Joey became famous in Alberta, in Edmonton. They have a statue of him. And I always tell people it's not what he did for mentally challenged kids. It's what he did for those kids' parents, that there is a life for them, that they can get in the community and they can be part of a city or a town and they can contribute. And I think that's what he did for so many kids in Canada and so many parents. And we used to tease about it in the early 80s, like we're all going to be gone and we're all going to be out of here and Joey's still going to be working here. And Joey worked right there till a year before he passed, which would be right the year before COVID, about 2021, I guess. And he was in the fixture in that locker room since 1981. So it was wonderful.
It's an incredible story. So you mentioned earlier you had a 10-year partnership with McDonald's. We've got our McDonald's operator clients here today. They've had Ronald McDonald House for 50 plus years, does incredibly good work. Did you have any involvement with Ronald McDonald House?
Oh, yeah. I did a lot of work with Ronald McDonald House. In Canada, the two big corporations have been incredible for less fortunate people. Charities would be Tim Hortons and McDonald's. They've gone out of their way to really impact youth and give them opportunities, whether it be camping grounds, covering and donating monies to softball teams, and really great in the communities. And McDonald's has been a huge part of that in our country. But I used to hang out at McDonald's like every other teenager, 14, 15, right? I was a normal teenager. But one of my favorite stories about McDonald's, in 1998 or 97, we came up with this plan. Okay, we're going to let professional athletes in the Olympics. So it was 1998, we were in Nagano, and I'm thinking, gosh, flying all the way to Japan to play a hockey tournament. And we get to Japan, and one of the great things about the Olympic Games, there's so many good things about it, but one of the greatest things about the Olympic Games is the commissary. So they had this room, it's like a massive place. And they have Polish food, and they have Scandinavian, they have Asian food, they have Russian food, North American, Italian, anything you want. And it's all set up for the athletes, right? So it's all like proper food, proper meals. And in the middle of it was a McDonald's buffet. And so when I walked in, there was not a lot of people in there, but I could tell that the other athletes were looking at me and they were sort of watching me. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, do I make them think that I'm proper eater? And I said, when am I ever going to see a McDonald's buffet? And I just went up there and I grabbed like 2 Big Macs, 2 Quarter Pounders, 2 fries, Diet Coke, and I turned around and I could just see their faces. They're all like staring at me. He's a professional athlete. I said, who wouldn't want to take advantage of that? That was a person's dream. Yeah. Where was that when I was younger?
Your sense of humour comes through in so much of the footage that I'd watched of you. And when I was outside before speaking to your manager, I mentioned to me there was this great story. You went to the Hall of Fame with one of your children,
yeah,
the Hockey Hall of Fame. Can you share that with us?
Well, where I grew up, the Hockey Hall of Fame originated back in the 60s, I guess. And so when I lived in Toronto, I'd get on the subway and go down to where the downtown area, and I just walk around the Hall of Fame when I was 14 and 15, and I think it was 25 cents to get into it. And I just kind of stare and look at everything. And so when I was able to go into the Hall of Fame, it was obviously a great day for me and my family, and actually really rewarding. So when I played, I had 3 children, and I retired in 99. But my wife said, we need more kids. And at that time, I guess my youngest would be 10. So we had a son in 2000 and a daughter in 2003. We're now, I guess, 22 and 23, or 21 and 23. We're actually going to 2 graduations next week, one at NYU and one at SMU. They're both graduating university, which is really nice. So I said to my son, we were going to Toronto. I had to do a business trip. And I said to my son one day, I said, listen, he was 8. I said, you want to go over to the Hockey Hall of Fame and see it? And now my son grew up with me in Sherwood in California and Thousand Oaks, and not a lot of hockey there. And I can kind of get around, and, I'm a normal parent there, fit in nicely and great friends. And so my son didn't really know me as Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player. So when we were getting ready to leave the hotel to go to the Hall of Fame, I said to him, now listen, I got to wear this hat and I'm going to have these glasses on. And don't be saying, Dad, that's you. Or I said, just be careful what you're saying. I don't want anybody to know I'm in here. So first thing we do, we get in there and he's got to buy a jersey. So I said, pick out a team jersey, what team you want. So he was smart enough. He picked out a good player, got a young guy from the Bruins at the time, Phil Kessel. So we put it on, he's walking around, and all these kids are in there. It was Midsummer's Day, so there's a lot of kids in there. And one of the great things about the Hockey Hall of Fame is there's an interactive division of it downstairs. And kids could take these pucks and shoot on a video screen. There was a goalie there, and you would take shots. And so my son said, Dad, can we try it? And I said, yeah. And I don't think he'd ever picked up a hockey stick. And so we get in the line, and we go up through the line, and you go into this middle of this rink, and my son, 1 for 1, he was 2 for 2, he was 3 for 3, then he's 3 for 4, and he's 4 for 5. So he says to me, Dad, you want to try this? And I said, oh, okay, I'll try it. So I get out there, and I'm 0 for 1, I'm 0 for 2, I'm 0 for 3 now. And the kid who's kind of standing beside me, who's monitoring the line, looks at me, he said, sir, if you move your hand down the stick a little farther. I got so pissed off. I took my hat off and glasses, and I said to my son, okay, run. We just started running out of there. I think the kid was holding the stick in awe. Like, what just happened? Never made a shot. And then a couple months later, we're in LA, and I wanted to go to a game. Tampa Bay Lightning were playing, and I was friends with the coach at Tampa Bay, and I wanted to see this young player, Steven Stamkos, play. So I hadn't seen him play live. And so my buddy and I and his friend and my son were sitting on the ice, and about after the first period, I think it was, we were getting up to go into the concession stand, and Luke Robitaille, who's the president of the Kings, I said, can we come to the game? But I don't like sitting up top. I like sitting on the ice so I can see the game. It's a better seat, and I wanted my buddies to be able to sit down on the ice and see it. So anyway, after the first period, we get up, and now, I don't know if you've ever been to an NHL game, but it's fast, they're big, it's physical, it can be pretty rough. And we get up, we're going to go into the concession area, And my son turns to my buddy and he said, okay, tell me honestly, did my dad really play in this league? And all I kept thinking was, oh my God, this kid never thinks I played. I'm 0 for 5. And can't believe I played against all these guys.
0 for 5, looks a bit rough.
I got to get him home and show him some video.
It's so great. So often fame is so relative, and it's good to hear even to your own children, which is hilarious. So mindset, you're very well known for being so calm and to do what you did. Mm-hmm. We had Kelly+Partners speak on mindset this morning. Can you share with us, like, what, in your view, if you look at yourself or a Jordan or a Kobe Bryant or a Carl Lewis type athlete, what's the mindset similarities and differences?
I would say this. You know, I grew up a huge sports fan, and I say this to people all the time. So in the 80s, when I used to watch McEnroe and Borg play against each other at Wimbledon.
The greatest.
And then when you saw Magic and Larry Bird go against each other in the NBA Finals. And then for me, I was a huge baseball guy, to watch George Brett continuously deliver hit after hit after hit. And I said to someone, the one thing they all had in common was they were smiling while they were doing it. They were loving, they wanted that pressure. They wanted to be in that situation. It made them calmer the bigger it was. And so that's why I idolize those athletes. And I think I tried to take what they did and what they had accomplished in a sense that, where else would you rather be? This is the greatest day of my life. I'm playing one-on-one with Larry Bird or Borg and McEnroe. They loved that compete feeling and that competitive spirit that they had. And that's what made them better, because you could tell they enjoyed it. And so to me, the greatest athletes, the stars who separate themselves from the good players, are the ones that want to be there when the pressure is most profound.
It's a great observation. So taking that into your life, how did you then, how do you think that mindset benefited you in your family and in your business and your whole life?
Well, family is easy in the sense that, I think that when you come from a good family, it's easy to prolong that. So my wife had a family of 7 kids. Unfortunately, her father died at a young age when she was only 16. But my mother-in-law is 103 and still lives in my house. I keep saying she's never going to get out. And her mindset is so strong. She's lost 2 daughters to breast cancer, and yet she gets up every day and she believes in the good Lord and believes in family. And my parents were the same way. Yeah. And they always say, I don't know if they always say, but a lot of people say when you marry, usually guys marry their mothers. And in my case, I married my father, no question about it. They're identical. But family becomes so imperative in life, right? And as my mother-in-law says, but the bigger the kids, the bigger the problems as they get older. But I'm lucky. I have now 5 wonderful kids and 5 spouses and about to have 7 grandchildren. We already have 5 and going to be 7 grandchildren, and they all get along and they're very polite. I think the greatest compliment you can get as a parent is when they say, your son is so polite or your daughter is so gracious. I always told them, it doesn't cost you more money to be nice, and that's kind of how you should live life.
Yeah. So as you go forward now, you've got grandkids and you're in this phase of your life. What's the most important thing to you over the next 20 years, 30 years?
Oh, gosh, I haven't even thought that far ahead. Yeah. Like every other person in here, I've been lucky enough to go and meet and have some great memories and life-lasting friendships. My best friend today, still, who never played professional hockey, we've been best friends since we were 10 years old. And those kind of things, those relationships and friendships are imperative in life. And then just the health and welfare of your kids and grandchildren. That's what you worry about, right? I've been lucky enough, the things I've done and got to accomplish, and now I wish that for that, for my kids and my family. I guess my competitive nervous spirit only comes now when I watch them compete, if they're competing, whether it's my kids or my son-in-law playing golf. Like, you pull for them and you want them to reap the benefits of their hard work and their dedication, right? And that's what brings joy to my wife and I, although I will say my grandson is going from T-ball to regular pitch, so I'm looking forward to that because the T-ball was getting a little boring. Like every other grandparent out there, you're like, oh my gosh. But as long as they're having fun, and we're building 3 ice rinks here in Palm Beach, and that's exciting. Hockey is growing here, and I'm really proud to be around this community, and it's been fun. And hockey is my life, and everything I have in my life is because of hockey. So I just still feel a part of it, except I don't have to worry about wins and losses. The stress of winning or losing Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, that's kind of behind me now.
Yeah. So if you look back to when you were 10 and you met your hero, could you have imagined the life that you've had?
Oh, not at all. My father used to borrow $20 from my grandmother every September to buy me a pair of new skates. Like I said, we had 4 boys in 1 bedroom, but that didn't even faze us. I couldn't even have imagined thinking that I've been able to travel and go to the places and cities and to meet the people I've met. Even our family, I wouldn't have met my wife had I not, moved on in life and become a professional athlete and went to Edmonton and then LA. I would have been in a small town, hometown, like everyone else. But fortunately for me, the good Lord gave me a passion and gave me some skill and talent to go with it, and I feel very blessed.
On the role of your wife, in the research that I was undertaking, it was your wife that said, come to LA.
No.
No?
No. Your research is wrong.
It's wrong.
Kidding. Yeah. She got blamed for me going to LA.
Okay.
But so I was going to get traded because I wouldn't re-sign a contract. I said, basically, no. I had a year to go on it, and I could become an unrestricted free agent. And I was sort of a salary cap for the league at that time. And so they didn't want me to become an unrestricted free agent. And that would have set the bar for other guys to get paid more. And so they basically sat me down and said, tell us where you want to go. And I said, okay. And I gave them a list of Philadelphia, LA, and Detroit, because Gordie Howe. And at the last moment, I think the deal was going to be done. I was going to go to Detroit. And my dad called me, and he said, listen, there's only one Gordie Howe. Detroit is Detroit. Why don't you do something unique and go to LA?
Okay.
And why don't you stand up and do something really brave? I got to LA, there was 4 high school teams. And I think now there's over 125 high school teams. There's like 4 sheets of ice in the LA area, and now I think they have over 50 ice sheets. So hockey's come a long way in California, and I'm proud to be a small part of it. But I'm glad I made the decision I made. But it really was my dad who was the one, the driving force that said, hey. And selfishly, I thought maybe I should go to Detroit because my dad could come to more games. It's only a 2.5-hour drive from my hometown. LA's tough to get to from Brantford. Yeah. But as it turned out, it was the right thing. Became partners in a Canadian football team with John Candy, which was a lot of fun, Uncle Buck. And we had a wonderful time. We won a championship in the CFL, and that was pretty special.
My research was wrong, and that's
kind of right.
because it was a tabloid or something.
She got blamed.
She got blamed for it.
Yeah,
Okay,
it really wasn't. She was 100% behind wherever we were going to go.
Yeah.
But it was my dad who stood up and said, "Listen, why don't you go to LA?" Which turned out to be wonderful. My kids were all raised out there. They all went to high school there, and you know the community very well. It's a great city. You know, there's so many big parts of LA that where we are on the outskirts, Thousand Oaks was just a tremendous family area and great place to raise kids.
Yeah, fan. And then what prompted the move to Florida?
It was kind of a combination of things. My daughter and son-in-law were here with the Graham boys. My other son was dating a girl from this area and moved here. And then my daughter was off to SMU that year, and my son was off to NYU that year. And we thought, you know what? Why not move down to where our grandchildren are and where the kids are? And we moved here, and in the midst of all that, ESPN and TNT had reached out to do some TV work for them. And it just wouldn't have been possible to fly from LA to Bristol, Connecticut, or LA to Atlanta every week. Being here in Florida, working with TNT, I'm an hour flight from Palm Beach up to Atlanta once a week. And it's turned out to be not only a good venture as far as the business of TNT goes, but also that we're closer to our family.
Fantastic. Now, I always like to finish by asking people a motto, quote, or thought that best summarizes your approach to life.
Oh my gosh.
Favorite motto?
Favorite model. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take?
Very famous for it. I want to thank you, Wayne, for your time today. I think it was tremendously generous for you to do that for us.
My pleasure. And does anybody have a question?
And take questions. Now, I think we've got a little QR code working, and you can put your question in there.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have a question for you. So my wife and I, we have a son who is playing professional sports, and he's beginning his journey. What advice would you care to share that we could pass on to him?
What sport?
Basketball.
Wow, good for him. You know, I always say this to kids, that the commitment and the work ethic is worth it. You know, I remember 13, 14, 15 years old, I'd have friends that said, hey, we're going to go to a movie tonight, or we're going to do this, and I'd be like, no, it's okay. I'm going to stay in the backyard and skate, or I'm going to play baseball. Like, your commitment is so worth it. And my dad was a big believer that the harder you work as a kid, the more fun you're going to have as an adult. And the more fun you have as a kid, the harder you're going to work as an adult. And it's so true. The commitment and the passion for what he's doing is so worth it at the end of the day. Just believe each and every day it's really, really worth it. I wouldn't trade my life in for anything in the world. I've been so blessed.
Wayne, thank you so much. This has been outstanding. So you were raised in a different socioeconomic upbringing to your own children,
Right.
4 kids in one bedroom. Mm-hmm. So how did you raise your kids to be empowered and not entitled?
Well, it's a fine line, isn't it? You know, I remember one time my wife said she got frustrated at one of the kids, and she goes, you know, my dad would have had me up against the wall. And I said, well, lucky you, my dad would have had me through the wall.
Yeah. I've had this discussion.
You know, and as a professional athlete, we travel so much, it becomes so imperative that the kids have the respect for their mother, because they're there all the time, right? And my wife was a wonderful mother, would do anything for her kids. And you got to be on the same page as parents, right? And it's so important. But in talking to the kids, it's respect, right? You respect your friends, you respect your school teachers, you respect the people around you. And that goes so far in life. And it's a fine line, because we've seen kids that really feel like they're owed things, right? And it's just, if we figure out, we could make a lot of money selling the book, right? It's a fine line, but I would say that your parents got to both be on the same page.
Wayne, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing some wisdom. I'm curious that when you were in a stressful or pressured situation on the ice, what did you tell yourself to help you perform and, really not succumb to the pressure?
Right. I think it starts before you get out there. The kids or the athletes that feel like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. I'm a little bit unsure. And what I was saying about Larry Bird and John McEnroe and those guys, that's where you want to be. Like you can't go out there thinking, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed, or wow, this is stressful. At the end of the day, you're playing a game. We're getting paid to have fun, right? We're getting paid to win, but there's more to life. What doctors do with heart surgeries, and those things are far more stressful than just being an athlete. And that's the way I looked at it. This is fun. Why, where else would I rather be? And I never worried about it.
Thank you so much for being here. A couple of times you referenced the good Lord in your discussion today, and I just didn't know if you could share a little bit about your faith and how much it had meant to you as far as your success and your journey.
So when I was a kid, my grandmother was Catholic, and my mom's side was Roman Anglican, and so at the time I was 5 years old, every Sunday I had to go to church. I got confirmed when I was 14 years old, and but my parents would get me up every Sunday morning, and I'd walk across the street, and this lady, she would drive me to the church around the corner, and I'd go every Sunday. And actually, the minister actually did our wedding in Edmonton for Janet and I. And I remember I said to my dad one time, I said, Dad, you got to start going to church. And so my dad started going to church. Gosh, I'd be 15 years old, and he never missed a Sunday the rest of his life. He used to tell my kids he was so mad that he tried out for the church choir and they wouldn't let him in. They said that his voice was not good enough for the choir. So my kids always thought that was funny. And then, we just had a big faith in it. I don't preach to people, but we're very big believers in the Lord. And like I said, the day I met Pope John Paul, I thought was one of the greatest days of my life. And to go to the Vatican and to be able to do something like that, I remember my dad's, that was the one time he was really, I think, extremely proud that because of his heritage that I got to meet Pope John Paul. So, yeah, we all do. We're believers in the good Lord. There's no question about that. And everything happens for a reason. And like I said, my mother-in-law is still alive, and my father-in-law passed when he was 55 years old, and two of my wife's sisters were taken. But, there's always a reason for what happens in life.
Wayne, thanks for being with us. I coach a lot of youth baseball.
Yeah.
So they're like 10 years old.
Right.
One of the biggest things for me with baseball is you can hit 3 out of 10 times and you'll be like one of the best players that's ever lived.
Right.
Do you have any advice for how to teach kids to deal with failure in sports?
Well, first of all, be one of the kids that's 3 for 10. don't be one of the kids that's 1 for 10. It's funny because I was telling you how much I love baseball. My son was a really good baseball player, and they actually have a Golden Glove, Rawlings Golden Glove for high school students across the country. One position player, so there's first baseman, second baseman, and on and on. Throughout the whole country, they pick 9 of them. And so one day, we were going into the school for something. I can't remember what it was. And as we were walking by, they have this trophy case. And they had the Rawlings Gold Glove there. And it said, presented to Trevor Gretzky. And I remember I looked at my wife and I said, did you know he won this? He didn't even tell us he won it. He won the Golden Glove for the United States of America in high school, which is pretty special. my dad always said, you're going to have failure in sports. That's going to be part of it, right? You're not always going to win. You're not always going to dominate. You're not always going to be successful. But he always believed it's the ones who get over their mistakes or their miscomings that end up ultimately, it's like business. Not every day flows, right? There's some days you go, oh my gosh, what are we going to do today? And sports is no different.
Hi, Wayne. Thanks for being here. Admitted fanboy. Remember going to the Boston Garden in the early 80s and come see you play. And I think you got knocked out in the first 20 seconds of the first shift. You're out of the game. So I think I saw about 20 seconds of going to the game there. But
well, let me tell you something. One time I was so lucky, I got on the cover of Time magazine with Larry Bird and I. And we happened to be playing in Boston on a Friday or Saturday. And we got there the day before, and my roommate and I, Kevin Lowe, I said, hey, you want to go to the Celtic game? I said, this would be cool. And he goes, yeah. So the Celtics, we called, and they said, okay, we'll get you 2 seats on the floor. It was cool. Larry and I were there. And I said, we got there, and I said to my buddy, I said, let's get a hot dog and a beer. And so we got a hot dog and a beer. And old Boston Garden, it was old, right? So we finally get to our seats. As we got to our seats, the referee was going like this, and Larry Bird got thrown out of the game, okay? 20 seconds in. And I went, what just happened? And they go, you get 2 technicals in basketball, you're out of the game. And Larry Bird said after the game, it was the only time he ever got 2 technicals in his whole career. And he said after the game, if he would have known I was there, he wouldn't have got thrown out. And I'm thinking, thanks. Anyway, go ahead.
That's good. That's good timing, right? But you mentioned Gordie Howe as kind of your idol growing up. And, for me, it was Bobby Orr. But did you ever skate with Bobby Orr or play at all?
Yeah. So I agree with you. Bobby Orr was sensational. And I always say to people, the 2 greatest players are Gordie Howe and Bobby Orr. If you were a forward, you thought Gordie Howe was. If you were a defenseman, you slam dunked Bobby Orr, no question. I played one time with Bobby Orr, and he actually lives 10 minutes from where I live. He lives here, and I see him quite a bit. He was friends with a gentleman that he played with somewhere, and I can't remember where. And this gentleman, unfortunately, ended up in a wheelchair. So they were doing a charity benefit hockey game for him in Winnipeg, actually. And it was the end of the season, and I had flown with 3 buddies to Hawaii. Now, I'd never been to Hawaii. And when you're 18 years old, you think you know everything, right? And the first day, we all put oil on us, and we couldn't move for 3 days, right? We'd never been in the sun like that. Anyway, halfway through my trip, I got a phone call from the coach, Glenn Sather, and he said, Bobby Orr's playing this charity hockey game in Winnipeg. I really think you should go. And I remember thinking, well, I'm here with all my buddies here. We got another 10 days in Hawaii. We're in Honolulu. And he goes, no, I think you should go. And so I got on the plane. I flew from Honolulu to Vancouver to Winnipeg, and I played 1 game with Bobby Orr. I think it was the last game he ever played. It was a charity hockey game in Winnipeg, and they raised all this money for his friend. And I was showing a guy a picture the other day of Bobby Orr and I sitting on the bench, and somebody said, I didn't even know you ever played with Bobby Orr, but I played with him one time.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I don't know. Hi. Don't know if it's a sensitive question, but you've been in the news lately with Alex Ovechkin breaking your record. Mm-hmm. What's it like when you set a record? Because all the athletes say, oh, I can't, I don't think about it, or it hasn't sunk in yet. Like, when does that sink in, and what's it like watching somebody else go through something you went through?
I want to block the net. No. Kidding. When I broke Gordie Howe's record, I remember saying to my dad one night, I said, I feel bad. I broke Gordie's record, because I idolized him so much and he's so nice. And I remember saying, the game is different, and I just don't feel great about this. And my dad looked at me and he said, you remember one thing? And I said, what? That you have the same dignity and gracefulness as Gordie Howe has when you broke his record as when the guy breaks your record. And I remember I looked at my dad and I said, well, can I just enjoy it for a little bit? Before we start talking about breaking it. I did what I did, and I'm proud of it. It's good for him. It's been great for hockey. It was front page news for a long time for the NHL. He's a wonderful young man. Washington has become a great hockey city because of him. And so it's all positive. I was really happy. We went in Friday morning because he was playing Friday night, and he needed 3 goals. And I remember they were playing a young Chicago Blackhawk team, and I said to my wife, we better go tomorrow. He's liable to get 2 or 3. And sure enough, he got 2. And so on Saturday morning, we drove from Washington into Manhattan, and we stayed in the city because we could see my son. And so then I drove out to the island Sunday morning for the game. It was a 12:30 game, and I was sitting there going, I kind of hope he doesn't score tonight, so we can, because he was playing Thursday back in Washington. I said, we can go to another game. It was kind of getting fun. Anyway, he scored quickly halfway through the second period, and so we ended up staying in Manhattan for 4 days, which was nice, and seeing my son. But it was all positive for hockey. It was really good.
Fantastic. Great questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.
I want to thank you so much for making the time.